traditional knowledge. So this is all about how to give clear definition on property rights, or how to establish the related legislation to just ensure the right, give right to the right person. The second dimension to the question is the mainstreaming green growth in existing mechanism. It includes public environmental expenditure review, strategic environmental assessment, and councils for sustainable development, and green accounting, and alternative development measures. So this, the dimension 2 is more like how we're gonna incorporate concept of green growth in existing mechanism in each country. And again, I'd like to talk about briefly emphasize the second item here, strategic environmental assessment, because many countries already are establishing the mechanism for environmental impact assessment, and strategic environmental assessment is more kind of focused on the social and economic components into environmental impact assessment. So this is another way how we incorporate social and economic concerns into existing environmental impact assessment. The third dimension is more is a green growth policy instrument to enhance green opportunities. So this is a more familiar kind of a mechanism based on market incentives, economic incentive, or market-based instrument. It includes certification of sustainable production and trade, subsidy reform, payments for ecosystem services, environmental fiscal reform, and green energy investment frameworks and incentives, inclusive green social enterprise, sustainable public procurement, and green innovation. And this slide, I'd like to emphasize a little bit further about the payments for ecosystem services. If you are familiar with the literature in line of payments for ecosystem services, there has been more than 200 case studies are reported in practice in worldwide. This is about how the beneficiaries of the environmental services pay to the provider of the ecosystem services. So this is the one thing actively discussed and implemented in developing countries. So I briefly talked about 3 dimensions about the how green growth can be incorporated into developing countries' policy plans and in development strategy. And I think dimension 1 and dimension 2 is more like is more relevant to the developing countries in terms of capacity building and all the how you're going to incorporate all things into existing system. And third one is more like based on the market-based instrument. Okay, that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Okay, as a final panelist, Professor Sang-Don Lee from Ewha Women's University of Korea.
Hello everyone, thank you Dr. Moderator introducing me. I'm Professor Sang-Don Lee, working at the Ewha Women's University, and my major is ecology, and previous speakers are talking about economic side of the green growth, and then what are the issues for green growth in economics or policy. But because of my background is ecology, so I'd like to talk about more about the ecology side of the green growth. Before I start, I'm sorry to not bring in my PPT slides. I do not fully understand the formation. I thought we are, usually this kind of a workshop, people are sitting in front and sharing and discussing thoughts, but this is more like a very formal workshop, and speakers are preparing PPTs, but I forgot to bring it, so I'm sorry about that. But I'd like to talk about the three issues for the green growth and this, regarding this workshop. First of all, I would like to see some kind of recent trend shifting toward to biodiversity and ecosystem, because IUCN previously, when they talking about this kind of issue or this conference, they all talk about conservation, conservation species and conservation ecosystem, things like that. But they are more focused on nowadays. They are more focused on their interests are more shifted to development and economy issues. So I can see some trends for the last few years. For example, like TEEB, the Economics of Ecosystem and Biodiversity, which issued in year 2009, and they estimated that every year we are losing about 50 billion euros per year because of degradation of our ecosystem. So we are losing that amount of money for ecosystem service. So that's kind of good quantitative estimate for the ecosystem service. Another is like recently they launched at the IPBES. IPBES also strengthening the ecosystem service and biodiversity. So this biodiversity and ecosystem service now are not only limited to conservation, but also they are connecting to development issues. Of course, in Korea we are very fast-moving country, so we already understand the trends. So we started that our current government saying green growth plus low carbon. So we say year 2008, we say low carbon and green growth. So we are quite advanced. We are well focused on the importance of the economic issues for this ecosystem. And we also had launched the GGGI this year, so that is also going to be much more emphasized on the green growth service. And second is this IUCN, as I said, adapted issues Nature Plus. And Nature Plus is kind of adjective, so we can use the Nature Plus for food, climate, people, things like that. And also they selected the topic Nature Plus Development. So Nature Plus Development are talking about issues on social and economic development. So in this issue, I would say they have some categories of social issues and economical issues and environmental issues. So when we say social issues, equity is a very important concept. Equity not only the rich and the poor, but also north and south. North developed countries and south developing countries, as Dr. Ahn discussing about the guideline for the developing countries, and also the equity for the generation. So we are the current generation, but our resources, our natural resources, are more targeted to future generations. So current generation and future generation should be have some kind of equal accessibility to natural resources. And efficiency is another important issue. So efficiency, when we're talking about natural resources, so supply and demand side should be more balanced. So when instead of supply side, demand side should decide the amount of production so that we can minimize the waste. And ecosystem conservation is also another issue for the Nature Plus development. So that related to issues number 3. So as Dr. Kwan discussed about the Nature Plus for development is we should strengthening the resilience. So how do we how do we increase the capability of resilience? So in ecology, when we say resilience can be increasing by identifying increasing number of species. So in ecosystem is a food web. So every species, one species are linking to another species connecting to other species. So it's all a linking system. So resiliency, we should increasing the number of species in the ecosystem. So biodiversity issue can be related to ecosystem. So we increase and we should identify many more species in the ecosystem. That related to recently CBD issues and ABS, access and benefit sharing. So by identifying more species, we can share our benefit to developing country and developed countries. And then the resilience also the concept of resilience should also involve the issues on assessment, as Dr. Tran from Vietnam talking about. We should identify species. We should identify species, and we do not know what each species are doing in the ecosystem. So that kind of thing we should do more. We need more research. We should identify more species and how those, when we say species and subspecies are maybe two different species and things like that. Also, nowadays we are talking about protected area. How do we increase our development for protected areas? So we identify many protected areas. So that protected area issues are related to what we call biodiversity offset. So when we say biodiversity offset, we not only previously we only care about each species, but nowadays we are talking about habitat, the quantitative measure of that habitat. So when we destroy the habitat, we should create another habitat for the species. So at least we can maintain the same amount of habitat before and after development. For example, our wetland, we should maintain no net loss. No net loss means if we destroy some wetland, we should create another wetland, at least hoping that that same amount of land can be guaranteed, and number of species also living there. So in our country, we have a very strong emphasis on EIA compensation mechanism, adopting that idea. For example, like ecosystem conservation cooperation fundings. So when the developer destroys some habitat or forested area or wetland area, each habitat we have the degree of green naturality. So depending on the importance of that area, the developer should pay the money to the government. So that we collect the money, and then later we use those money for the conservation or restoration or purchasing habitat, things like that. So so in summarize, nature plus development can have issues. We should increase, we should maximize the biodiversity, and we should be concerned about resiliency of nature. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. 지금 한번만 하겠습니다. 지금까지 이제 발표자 또 네 분의 진영 토론 패널 토론자분들의 이야기를 들어봤습니다. 일단 제가 오늘 워크숍에서 패널 토론의 포인트 핵심으로서 생각하고 있는 것이 사실 잘 아시는 것처럼 개발도상국이 이제 풍부한 자연자원을 갖고 있는 그러한 국가들이 이제 개발도상 국가가 상당히 많습니다. 따라서 이제 이들 개발도상국에서 자연자원의 가치와 보존을 향상시키면서 경제 발전을 함께 어떻게 이룰 수 있는지, 또 어떤 툴이 가능한지, 능력 형성, 커패시티 빌딩을 위해서 필요한 것들은 무엇인지, 이러한 것들을 이제 논의의 핵심으로 생각을 했습니다. 이렇게 오늘 쭉 들어보니까 이제 중국과 베트남의 사례라든지 전략, 또 정책 이러한 것들이 지금 제가 말씀드린 몇 가지 그 핵심 사항에 대해서 많은 그런 그 내용들이 있었고요. 또 특히 OECD에서도 개발도상국과 공동 연구를 수행하면서 개발도상국에서 그린 그로스라는 것이 어떤 의미인지, 또 개도국과 관련되어 있는 어떤 그 쟁점 사항들, 특히 인프라 구축이라든지 어떤 기본적인 요건이 무엇인지, 또 마켓 툴로서의 어떤 정책적인 도구가 개도국에 효과적으로 사용될 수 있는지, 이러한 것들을 이제 OECD에서 그 연구 결과를 내용을 소개해 주셨습니다. 그래서 지금 이제 아무래도 우리 그 지정 토론자, 주제 발표자가 그 계시니까 여기 단상에 오셔서 지금 제가 말씀드린 그런 몇 가지 쟁점 사항 중에서 한 2개 정도 포인트만 시간이 허락되는 범위 내에서 조금 딥 디스커션을 하고, 그 다음에 플로어에서 질의를 받고 응답하는 순서로 이렇게 하겠습니다. 그래서 잠깐 오셔서 자리를 같이 해주시고요. 특히 제가 이제 오늘 그 워크숍은 상당히 유용한데 시간이 워낙 제한되어 있기 때문에 제가 아까 그 발표를 쭉 듣다 보니까 그 OECD에서 일단 오시죠. 예. 시간이 제한되어 있어서 일단 좀 조금 제한된 시간에서 좀 딥 디스커션을 했으면 하는 2가지 포인트를 좀 이야기를 하겠습니다. 첫 번째가 아까 그 OECD에서 우리 그 안 박사님이 발표하신 그 내용 중에서 그린 그로스가 개도국에 이제 어떤 의미를 갖는가, 또 개도국 개발도상국 입장에서 가장 중요한 것을 몇 가지 제안을 하셨는데, 그 중에서 어떤 그 공유제에 대한 그 소유권, 또 시장 메커니즘 이러한 것들을 말씀을 하셨습니다. 그리고 또 시장 메커니즘하고도 연계되는 부분이 우리 그 베트남에서 오신 닥터 보에서 어떤 메이저 아이디어로 말씀하신 그런 implementation of economization of managing natural resources and environmental protection. 그 2가지 그 사항에 대해서 혹시 우리 오늘 참석하신 패널리스트들의 좀 깊은 의견을 좀 들었으면 좋겠습니다. 그래서 아무래도 우왕 박사님께서는 해주실 수 있으실까요? Translation is a little bit late. Yeah. Did you get? Okay. Yeah. Oh, you didn't. Okay. I want to try to discuss it even more in detail. Okay. Yes. 첫 번째가 그 공유제에 관한 소유권, 그러니까 resource and land rights regime, erased by Dr. I, in perspective of OECD. And second one is this is Dr. Bo's idea. Yeah, your idea, right? Yeah, it's the implementation of economization of managing natural resources and the environment protection. Okay, so you?
No,
you first.
Yeah, you my first. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, first question, I think this is very important for the land and resource, the ownership and the rights. Actually, you say I think in the 1960s sometime, one of the people in the nature, the common strategy, actually. So actually in the nature conservation and the extreme conservation, the main problem is who take care of that, who has the ownership and who has the benefit of it. Actually in China, recently we have the forest land right reforming. It means you say China will have the 2 kinds of the ownership. one of state ownership, second is collective ownership. State ownership is easy to understand. It means this this land owned by the country, but all the people, a country, government, representative of the whole people. The second, the collective ownership, it means some of the land or forest or wetland owned by a group of people like a village as a. So the government know how to push it in the reform. It means the collective ownership divided to the every family, every people like this. So actually this is one of the way to push the ownership change and the right change. So every piece of land, every piece of forest have some people to take care or get protected or get a benefit from the use of this. I think it is very important for that, for the resource and also, but of course it can solve all the problems. I think it's a very important step for that.
Okay, this term, not all the people in Vietnamese even like this term, economization. But that's come from the ideas that in the past, under the central planned economy, and even at the beginning of the reform in Vietnam or China,